Hi, Dad. We're going to make a video about you and your time in the service. First question, what were you doing before you went into the Air Force?
I was going to school. I was at Iowa City.
And what was your major?
Fun.
How many semesters were you able to complete?
3 and a month.
3 in a month, so not even 2 years.
No.
And were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, we enlisted, volunteered.
And why did you volunteer for the Army Air Corps?
To keep the hell out of the infantry. We went from Oklahoma to Kansas, Garden City, Kansas, which is another little bitty town in the middle of the. It was one of those places where you could stand up to your ankles in mud and dust blew in your face. It was windy, cold, because it was late fall. In fact, we went from fall through Christmas there. And that was called basic training, which was just a little bigger aircraft, a little more powerful, a little more intricate, and so forth. And but all went fairly well there. And
so did you fly the B-24 there?
Oh, heavens, no, you're not anywhere near that yet.
Okay. Took a lot of training, huh?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Where did your training progress from there, Dad?
Well, from Garden City, Kansas, we went to Altus, Oklahoma, which was advanced fire training. Before you left, you had a choice, and maybe you got it, maybe you didn't, whether you wanted to go to a single engine, which would have been a fighter pilot, or twin engines, which were bomber pilots. I chose the twin engine because I thought I would be safer with more than one engine. But anyway,
good reason.
We trained there, and I had the first plane we flew in. I had a heck of a time because it was called a bamboo bomber because it was so light, and there was always a crosswind, and I had a hell of a time landing it. And then just about the time I figured they were going to throw me out, we changed to a different plane, which was dived like a rock, and I could fly it perfectly. And that was the end of that. And then we graduated and became second lieutenants in April of, I don't know what year it was. Hell, was it in April anyway?
After that training, you got a break and you got to go home. Was that when you and Mom got engaged?
Well, actually, we got engaged in Chickasha, Oklahoma. She came down there all by herself on a train, and I bought a ring. And later on, when my mom saw the ring, she said, that'll never do. So we got a better ring, and later on. But that was kind of the occasion, which was she was there for a few days, and I would when training was over, I would hitchhike into town and hitchhike back at 2:00 in the morning.
Sounds very romantic.
Oh yeah, it was. Yeah. Well, after graduation from advanced training and went home and had a little leave, we went to Fort Worth, Texas, and learned to fly and got checked out and trained in the 4-engine bombers, B-24 Liberators. After fully being qualified in that, went to some Fairfield Suisun Air Base in California, and it was kind of a pool made up of pilots, co-pilots, everything. And from there we had a crew made up. I got my co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, all the 9 yards, radio operator, engineer, and so forth for the entire crew.
How many guys altogether were on that plane?
9, I think. Let's see. Me, Earl, Irving, Krause, Jerry. Yeah, 9.
And how old were you?
Well, let's see. It was 9. I had just turned 21.
And you were in charge of a huge plane and 8 other guys.
Right, right.
Wow. That's the greatest generation, Dad.
A real big shot, depending on how you spell shot.
So you're in California and you're waiting to be deployed. Tell us what it was like.
Well, like I say, after our training in Walla Walla, we came as a whole crew to California. It was an airfield between Sacramento and San Francisco. And at night, we could either go to San Francisco on a bus, or there was a fellow there that was married and his wife was there and had a car, and they went to, he couldn't stay off base, but he could go overnight like we did. So we went into Sacramento. We would stay all night, party in between, or bar hop, or whatever we did. And then one day we came back, and all of a sudden they said, as we came through the gate, "Pack your bags, you're going to leave tonight." And that was it.
You had to get ready and to leave, and tell us what transpired next.
Well, you had to leave, get going, because the winds were right, and you couldn't get to Hawaii from San Francisco in a B-24 unless you had at least not a tailwind, but at least you didn't have a headwind. And it turned out to be a 14.5-hour flight, which was scary because there was nothing, you just saw nothing but water between San Francisco and Hawaii. There was no, if you had trouble, you landed in the water. Fortunately, we did not.
And tell them what day it was, Dad.
Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve, Merry Christmas. So like I always told Mom, I never had to go to Hawaii because hell, I spent Christmas Day in Hawaii. But it was under not very good circumstances.
Dad has a very interesting story about flying out of Hawaii. Tell us about it, Dad.
Well, that morning, we got up very early. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning to get a briefing. My co-pilot and the navigator and myself, and the briefer, who for the weather was so hungover from celebrating Christmas that he said, "Oh, everything's fine, everything's great." Well, we took off, and we weren't out more than a few minutes, and a couple thousand feet, we hit one of the heaviest thunderstorms I've ever been in. And all of a sudden, a phenomena called St. Elmo's fire. The plane just lit up like a Christmas tree. Flames, kind of like sparks, going from propeller to propeller, and along the wings and all the whole plane. It was just lit up. And I committed the cardinal sin of flying. I didn't pay attention to my instruments. I was flying by the seat of my pants. Fortunately, the co-pilot was sharp enough to say that while we were going around in a circle and we straightened out, it took me about 5 minutes to realize that I was not flying level. But anyway, turned out fine. We flew through the thunderstorm for a little while, came out, sunshine all the way to, I don't remember the name of the little bitty island, but it was just big enough for an airstrip.
After Hawaii, Dad, where did you go?
Well, from Hawaii, as I say, we went to a little island that I can't remember the name of, and since I lost my logbook, it was a very small island, just a little dot in the ocean, big enough for an airstrip and a few barracks and a few troops. And from there, we went to Guadalcanal, just as a landing spot, it was after a lot of the fighting was over. Terrible place. I've been a lot of humid places, but that was the worst. and from Guadalcanal to New Guinea, and there we were assigned to the 90th Bomb Group. And from New Guinea, we went to a little island called Biak, B-I-A-K, which is the called the Dutch East Indies, and that's when we really started flying missions from there. Well, from Biak Island, we flew our first real missions, which were to Borneo, and we even flew the day and bombed on the day of the invasion of Borneo. And everybody says Borneo, they never even heard. Well, everybody's heard of Borneo, but Borneo is full of oil, and that's where the Japanese got a good part of their oil. And when we cut that off, that was really a big deal. And we only flew there 3 times, and after that we moved up to the Philippines, to an island called Mindoro, south of Manila.
Tell us about your missions after that then, Dad.
Well, after the Philippines, we moved up to an island called Ishima. It's Ieshima. It's a little north and west of Okinawa, not too far from Japan, or the southern tip of Japan. Fortunately, by that time, just about that time, they dropped the bombs, and we were alleviated of any missions to Japan. Although we did make one before the truce was signed, although they had said that they surrendered. But they sent us up there. We were armed, told not to bomb unless we got shot at first, which I thought was a little unfair, but anyway, that's what. But it was quite an experience because I have never seen so many ships and firepower and artillery in my entire life. It was all ready for anybody that had tried to invade the southern part of Japan, which is where they figured we were going. And but fortunately, nobody had to go. And I know the bombs killed a lot of people, and a lot of people are against it, but it saved millions of lives, not only our own, but the Japanese. The Japanese would have been practically annihilated if it hadn't been for that.
Dad, what was the most dangerous thing about flying the B-24?
Well, most of it was the fact that they were all so long. Some flights we flew some flights that were 12, 13 hours long, and all over water. You never saw land until you got to the target and got back. A lot of our stuff was going over to the China Sea and hunting out shipping. And if it wasn't friendly, why, you bombed it, or tried to. Well, the closest call we ever had, other than being shot at, and fortunately we never got hit bad enough to do any harm. We came back from a long flight, and it was overcast, and the navigator said, let us down through the overcast, and said, well, now the airport ought to be off to our left, but it wasn't. And you could hear the airport, you could hear the radio from the airport or from the airfield, but they couldn't hear us. So you couldn't get what they call a fix, which they gave you. They would tell you what heading to direct to get you. So we flew around a while, and the navigator said, oh, I'll find us. And I finally said, the hell with you. We lowered our radar dome and climbed up a little higher, and the radar man found where we were and found the airfield. And we landed and ran out of gas as we were taxiing off the runway.
Tell us about how difficult it was to take off with a load of bombs.
Well, that was probably the most dangerous part of everything, besides getting shot at, which fortunately we got missed most of the time.
Most of the time.
Because we had several thousand pounds of bomb plus an extra 500 gallons of gas when you went on a long flight. And what you had to do is get right at the very tippy edge of the runway and rev up your engines as fast as you could. The pilot and the co-pilot would stand on the brakes, so the engineer would rev up the engine until you got up to a good RPM, and then you let your feet go and you try to roar down the runway and get up enough speed to get you off. And unfortunately, the plane right ahead of us one time didn't make it, and it exploded right at the end of the runway just before we were ready to roar down the runway, because as soon as the one plane took off, you took off yourself, but we didn't.
Tell us about when you picked up the prisoners of war.
Before the war was over and these prisoners up in the Philippines had been liberated from, some of them from the Bataan Death March even, every plane around, whether it was a transport plane or a bomber plane like ours, were pressed into service to pick them up and take them to Manila, to there was a big hospital there, what was left of it. It was quite an experience, and I think I was more nervous of that, of any combat flight, because I figured if I made a bad takeoff or a bad landing or something, and these guys have been going through for years, and then they have screw up on their way home. But we made it, and it was for some reason we were allowed to pick them up and say hi and so forth, but we weren't allowed to talk to them, and I don't know just why that was. But
Okay, Dad, tell us about how everything ended up.
well, like I say, after flying 38 missions and the war was over, why, we were privileged to go home, and we were sent to Manila to a reception center, and from there you were parceled out, and we were supposed to have the privilege of flying home, but it turned out that there were so many of us that they, unless you were a captain or better, why you couldn't fly home, and we went on a Liberty ship. It took 30 days to go from Manila to Fort Lewis, Washington. And if you look at a map, that's a long ways. But it wasn't too bad, although the bunks were 4 high. And I think I was in the third one from the floor, which if you fell out, it would probably broke every bone in your body. But we played cards for 30 days in a row, got 2 meals a day and had to eat standing up, because they said standing up eating was better for your digestion. But the food was all right, and there were showers. They were saltwater showers, but they were warm. And the weather was not bad until we got just about to Washington, but because then it was late November, so it did get cool. The physical examinations and all the other stuff, we were sent to Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, and from there we got after a couple of days of processing there, got our final discharge papers and got to go home.
And
freight paid, and postage paid.
And you made it home for Christmas, right?
Made it home for Christmas, right.
And
1945.
And did your brother get home before you? Did Kay get home before you or after you?
I think he got home before me.
And how about Roy?
I don't remember exactly when, but I think we were all home for Christmas.